The morning of June 28, 1149, saw the plains before the fortress of Inab in northern Syria drenched in tension. Prince Raymond of Poitiers, ruler of the Principality of Antioch, stood with his men alongside an unlikely ally, the Nizari Assassins. Before them, Nur ad-Din, the formidable emir of Aleppo, had encircled their position with his seasoned host. Caught unprepared, Raymond rallied his forces for a desperate breakout. What followed was a bloody clash that would reshape the balance of power in the Levant and forever mark the Second Crusade as a disaster for the Latin states. The Battle of Inab cannot be understood without the wider context of the failed Second Crusade. In 1147, armies led by King Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany had marched east, answering Pope Eugenius III's call to recover Edessa, which had fallen to Zengi in 1144. Instead of triumph, the expedition collapsed in disunity, poor planning, and defeat, most notably during the ill-fated Siege of Damascus in 1148. As the crusading monarchs withdrew, their departure left the Crusader States exposed. The great hope of Latin Christendom had evaporated, and the reputation of leaders like Louis was badly tarnished. On his return journey through the Mediterranean, his fleet was intercepted by the Byzantines, who still clashed with King Roger II of Sicily. Louis escaped, but his wife Eleanor of Aquitaine and part of his household were briefly seized before Norman ships rescued them. Though reunited in Sicily, the royal marriage was strained, their union unraveling into divorce only a few years later. The failure of the crusade left not only bitterness in Europe, but also emboldened the Muslim rulers of Syria. In particular, the House of Zangi, now led by Zengi's son Nur ad-Din, stood poised to capitalize on Christian weakness. In the wake of the Crusaders' retreat, Latin Syria fractured from within. The county of Tripoli, ruled by Count Raymond II, descended into turmoil when a vassal named Bertram challenged his authority. Nursing a personal grudge over his father's death, Bertram gathered support from disillusioned French knights returning home from the failed crusade. In 1148, he struck, capturing the castle of Arama and threatening Tripoli itself. Desperate and abandoned by his fellow Latins, Raymond turned to a shocking ally, Nur ad-Din. Seizing the opportunity, Nur ad-Din marched with his Damascene partner Unor, besieged Arima, and crushed Bertram. The rebel and his family were taken prisoner to Aleppo, where they would remain for more than a decade. This episode revealed two truths. First, the Crusader states were dangerously divided, willing to call upon their sworn enemies for aid. Second, it showed Nur ad-Din that Latin defenses were thin and vulnerable. From this point, he pursued a relentless campaign to expand Zengid power across northern Syria.
The only Latin leader with the strength, or perhaps the audacity, to resist Nur ad-Din was Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch. With King Louis and Conrad gone, and little help from Jerusalem, Antioch stood alone. Seeking allies wherever he could find them, Raymond entered into an unlikely pact with the Nizari Ismailis, known to the Latins simply as the Assassins. The Nizaris, based in the fortress of Masyaf, were Shia Muslims opposed to the Sunni leadership of Nur ad-Din. Their leader, Ali ibn Wafa, agreed to fight alongside Raymond. Yet even with assassin support, Raymond's army was dwarfed by the forces Nur ad-Din could muster with Seljuk and Damascene backing. The confrontation began with skirmishes. In 1149, Seljuk Sultan Masud of Rum pressed Antioch by seizing Marash while Nur ad-Din raided to the south. Raymond struck back with a surprise attack at Famia, briefly scattering Nur ad-Din's troops. But the emirs soon recovered, harassing Raymond at Bagras and forcing him to retreat. The stage was set for a decisive clash at the fortress of Inab, guarding Antioch's southern frontier. Nur ad-Din marched with around 6,000 cavalry and additional militia from Aleppo. Raymond, bolstered by Ali ibn Wafa's assassins and a local garrison, fielded perhaps 5,000 men, including 4,000 horse and 1,000 infantry. Initially, Raymond's numbers slightly exceeded Nur ad-Din's, prompting the emir to withdraw east of the Orontes. Raymond believed he had blunted the invasion. He left part of his army inside Inab's fortress while encamping with the rest on the plains nearby. Ali ibn Wafa warned him that splitting his forces was dangerous, but the prince pressed ahead. At dawn on June 29th, Nur ad-Din returned with speed and surprise, surrounding Raymond's camp at a place called the Fountain of Murad. The Antiochans, caught off guard, scrambled to form lines. In a desperate bid to break out, they launched a ferocious cavalry charge that at first seemed successful. But clouds of dust and confusion slowed their advance, giving Nur ad-Din's mounted archers time to wheel in from all sides.
Encircled and overwhelmed, the Latin and Nizari army collapsed. Prince Raymond and Ali ibn Wafa were both slain in the melee. Only a handful of survivors cut their way free. The battlefield was littered with the bodies of Antioch's finest knights, their banners trampled into the dust. The Battle of Inab was more than a bloody defeat. It marked the effective collapse of Antioch's power in northern Syria. Nur ad-Din pressed his advantage, seizing Antiochene lands east of the Amanus Mountains and pushing the principality back to its coastal strip. The loss echoed that of the Field of Blood in 1119, but this time there would be no miraculous recovery. If Antioch's future was bleak, Edessa's was terminal. The county had already been shattered by Zengi's conquest in 1144, but its ruler, Jocelyn II, clung to fragments of territory around Turbessel. In 1150, while seeking aid from King Baldwin III of Jerusalem, Jocelyn was ambushed and captured by Nur ad-Din's men. He languished in an Aleppan prison until his death years later. His wife, Countess Beatrice, recognized the futility of defending Edessa alone. Surrounded and abandoned, she negotiated to sell the remaining castles to Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos. Though Manuel accepted and garrisons briefly occupied the sites, they were too remote to hold. Within months, Nur ad-Din and his Turkish allies partitioned the territory. The Seljuks of Rum took Kaisun and Aintab. The Artukids seized Biricik and Samosata, and Nur ad-Din claimed Turbessel itself. The county of Edessa ceased to exist, the first of the Crusader States to fall permanently. While Antioch and Edessa suffered external blows, Tripoli faced turmoil within. In 1152, Nur ad-Din captured Tertosa, severing communications between Jerusalem and the northern states. Baldwin III of Jerusalem managed to retake the ruined port, entrusting its defense to the Knights Templar. But Tripoli remained fragile.
Domestic strife added to its woes. Count Raymond II's marriage to Hodierna of Jerusalem deteriorated amid rumors of infidelity. As tensions peaked, Hodierna's sister, Queen Melisende of Jerusalem, intervened, accompanying her sibling to Tripoli in hopes of reconciliation. As the party moved through the city, assassins struck. Raymond II was cut down in the street. The killers were members of the Nizari sect, the same group that had once allied with Raymond of Poitiers against Nur ad-Din. Their motive remains debated, though many suspected the hand of Hodierna herself. Regardless, the Countess assumed regency for her young son Raymond III, while Jerusalem provided protection. Tripoli, already weakened, staggered under the weight of internal discord and external threats. Even the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the strongest of the Latin states, was not immune to division. By 1152, a bitter struggle erupted between Queen Melisende and her son Baldwin III. Melisende, who had ruled as regent since Baldwin's youth, was reluctant to surrender authority. Baldwin, now in his 20s, demanded sole control. Factions formed around each. Melisende was supported by powerful nobles like Manasses of Hierge, while Baldwin gathered discontented barons. When compromise failed, Baldwin seized Mirabel Castle, exiled Manasses, and marched on Jerusalem. Melisende withdrew into the citadel, but after a brief siege, negotiations forced her to yield. She retired to Nablus, leaving Baldwin sole ruler. Though resolved without widespread bloodshed, the civil war sapped Jerusalem's unity.
At the very moment Nur ad-Din was consolidating Syria, the kingdom fractured in disputes over power and influence. With northern expansion closed off, Baldwin turned his ambitions south. The port of Ashkelon, still held by the Fatimids of Egypt, remained a thorn in the kingdom's side, serving as a base for raids and a barrier to secure control of the coast.
In 1153, Baldwin assembled the full strength of Jerusalem, supported by the Templars, Hospitallers, and numerous lords. Pilgrim ships bolstered the fleet. Siege engines battered Ashkelon's formidable walls through the summer. At one point, a fire set by defenders spread to the siege towers, but also weakened a section of the wall. Templars rushed into the breach, only to be slaughtered in fierce fighting. Despite setbacks, persistence paid off. By August, starvation forced the garrison to surrender on terms of safe passage to Egypt. The capture of Ashkelon was a triumph for Baldwin and secured Christian control over the Levantine coast from north to south. Yet it was also one of the last great victories of the Latin kingdom before the rise of Saladin a generation later. While Jerusalem celebrated, Nur ad-Din prepared his masterstroke. Damascus, long independent under the Barid dynasty, had once allied with the Crusaders against Zengi. But with the death of its ruler, Unur, the city passed to Emir Mujir ad-Din Abak, who renewed tribute to Jerusalem. This policy proved deeply unpopular among Damascens, who saw Nur ad-Din as a more legitimate defender of Islam. For several years, Nur ad-Din waged psychological warfare. He camped beneath Damascus's walls, condemning Mujir for weakness and exploiting the discontent of the populace. He was aided by Najm ad-Din Ayyub, father of the future Saladin, who stirred resentment against Mujir's pro-Frankish stance. Finally, in April 1554, Nur ad-Din acted. A skirmish at the eastern gate allowed his troops to slip into the city. The people welcomed him as liberator. Mujir fled, and Damascus fell without prolonged resistance. With Damascus united to Aleppo under Nur ad-Din, the dream of his father Zengi was realized, a unified Muslim Syria, poised to resist and eventually roll back the Crusader States. For the Latins, this spelled the beginning of the end. The years between the failure of the Second Crusade and the fall of Damascus defined the decline of the northern Crusader states. The Battle of Inab shattered Antioch. The capture of Edessa erased the first Crusader county. Tripoli reeled under both Nur ad-Din's assaults and internal strife, and even Jerusalem fractured in civil war. Though Baldwin III's capture of Ashkelon offered a fleeting triumph, Nur ad-Din's conquest of Damascus ensured Muslim unity. Within decades, this foundation would allow leaders like Saladin to confront the Crusaders with overwhelming strength, culminating in the fall of Jerusalem itself in 1187. The defeat at Inab, though overshadowed by larger battles, was a turning point. It demonstrated that the Crusader states could be destroyed not only by external invasion, but by internal weakness, miscalculation, and reliance on fleeting alliances. From that moment forward, the fate of the Latin East was sealed.